Thank you so very much again for sticking and staying and joining us this evening. I have with me Mr. Sean C. Harrison. Sean is a talented Jamaican singer, songwriter, poet, general writer, a mental health advocate, and a mental illness sufferer. Look, I mean, who is better to be here with us this evening? Now, despite facing these challenges of living with schizophrenia, a schizoaffective disorder, Sean has continued to express himself through creativity. He reminds us that mental illness doesn't define who we are. It's one part of much a bigger story. A story of strength, resilience, and purpose. Sean.
Yes, sir.
Thank you so very much for being here with me and to be willing to share your story with us.
It is my express pleasure.
Wonderful. So let us just jump right into it and understand, your journey. Can you share a little about your journey and what it has been like living with a mental illness?
Well, I started out as a very promising child, gifted with one talent to sing, and sing I did. I started ministering right here in the parish of St. Thomas, Jamaica at age 3, and I would have had, my start right there at the Anglican Church Hall as well as in the Morant-based Seventh-day Adventist Church, singing gospel and Christian songs to bless the hearts of many who came into contact with my gift. Having grown up in a musical family, my father, Mr. Lascelles Harrison, and my mother, Mrs. Patricia Patsy Harrison, they also called my father Churchill as well as Bambino. They too were very gifted. My father played the piano/organ at church and otherwise, and my mother was a singer in a trio called the Trisons in the Adventist Church that ministered all over the parish of St. Thomas and even outside of St. Thomas.
Wonderful.
My father also was one of the members of a quartet called Heralds of the Hour, and my mother also sang in the church choir. So having had that base and foundation of music, sweet music that would ring out in my home constantly, classical music, and gospel music and all kinds of wonderful sounds, I would have assimilated into my psyche all the benefits of being exposed to things like those. And not only was I exposed to music, but my mother especially made sure that we as children were well-rounded and, as I said, were well exposed to many of the finer things of life. I have to credit her with that, and my father by extension. So having grown up, and having been growing in that setting, I would have done very well academically and was a very bright, rambunctious child. But little did I know that fast forward to my older adolescent years, something would have reared its head that was unprecedented in my life and experience, which was the diagnosis of paranoid schizophrenia. I must still go back a little to family life again, because I had 3 siblings, 1 sister and 2 brothers, 1 brother now deceased when I was only 14 years old. And so that loss, coupled with a family history of mental illness, as well as other traumas, and stress in the time when I was diagnosed at age 19, would have triggered this family illness.
Right.
And, my world would have changed drastically in terms of how I perceived my surroundings, how I perceived people with the onset of paranoid schizophrenia.
Right.
You know, for, you know, quite some time before that, life seemed the typical experience that many of us Jamaican children would have had growing up in the country, maybe not the country,
Right.
you know, side of Jamaica, but growing up, you know, running the streets and lanes and paths and, you know, hills and valleys, you know, picking fruits, playing with our friends, you know, cricket, tree a pass, skip in the middle, you know, all kinds of things. Stone broke,
right.
Rubber broke.
You know, if all the persons who would be listening to us would know all of what you're talking about.
Maybe
right?
at our age, you know, we know more about those things. So
Right.
yes, so you know, I actually, you know, had in many respects a good childhood, I must say.
That's right.
But there were also other things that factored significantly into my diagnosis of paranoid schizophrenia at age 19, which very importantly included a breakdown in family life. Mother and father were no longer in a harmonious relationship, and you know, things spiraled in the family, and I would have been privy to and witnessed a number of very traumatic things for the age that I was at. You know, marital strife, and you know, that would have taken its toll also. So the truth is that it's a story that, you know, in order to give, you know, the full picture, I would have to take much more time, but I'm trying to condense. But the truth is that one very important thing was the family history on the paternal side of mental illness. And, you know, I would have ended up, you know, finding my mind taken over by forces that were largely beyond my control to actually rein in. And so it made life very difficult for me as I moved onwards from 19 years old, even into my 20s, my 30s, and even my 40s. And so I would have ended up, you know, being enrolled in the psychiatric clinics, you know, at the University Hospital of the West Indies, as well as the Princess Margaret Hospital later on. You know, the diagnosis was made in 1997. And, you know, I would have started a regimen of medications in order to control what was happening to me. So important to note was that, I mean, I had to educate myself about the illness a little ways into it, because I didn't just seamlessly accept, you know, treatment and whatever I had to do, cognitive behavioral therapy, or whatever I had to do at the get-go. You know, I had to be a little way into it when I realized to myself certain things weren't settling. The paranoia was nagging. You know, sleep patterns were changing. And so, you know, I ended up, after having educated myself, you know, about the illness, enrolling in the Princess Margaret Hospital, where I have been receiving treatment, you know, for most of my experience of paranoid schizophrenia. But one thing I must say, the creative spark never waned. It never left. And my penchant for songwriting as well as singing just blossomed and multiplied until years later, you know, I branched out into other forms of writing, like poetry, as well as general writing, where I would write like Christian discourses, proverbs and wise quotes, as well as essays and letters, correspondences to different arms of government, you know, fighting my own cause when life actually took a turn for the worse. And so that is why I use the term general writer to describe what it is that I cannot put neatly into a category, but general writer, because material of all types I was able to pen. So my journey in a nutshell would have been such that I am here today at 48 years old, after having been beaten, bruised, and battered by life, and I am still thankful, I am still hopeful,
Right.
and I keep on expanding my horizons in the best way I can, to, be the best version of myself that I can ever be and will ever be.
Definitely, definitely. And, I really appreciate that, and in your, discourse just now, you mentioned, earlier the support of family,
Yes.
the initial stage, and so I want to just ask, while I understand, you said, the mother and the father, what happened after, but how have your family in general, your friends, or, the community supported you throughout your journey?
Well, I must say, in the very, very first stages of the illness, when the first diagnosis that was made was brief reactive psychosis with a diagnosis of schizophrenia. Later that year, it happened, where there was an outburst in January of 1997, and then later on that year, when I broke down again, the diagnosis of paranoid schizophrenia was made, or given. Actually, my family, my immediate relatives, my mother, my brother, Dave, my sister Sandy, and my two nephews were all in Jamaica. My father had emigrated in 1988, but they were all in Jamaica. But they would have emigrated at just a couple years after my diagnosis. Mm-hmm. But within the time that they were present in the home, in my experience, they went above and beyond the call of duty to actually, have me brought back to a state of functioning and well-being. So I must credit them in the initial stages for having done so, but soon enough, because of different reasons, they all would have emigrated early in my experience, and I would have found myself alone in Jamaica, largely based on my own decision to remain here because of factors that I don't necessarily, divulge so readily, but I knew in my spirit that it was best for me to remain in Jamaica. And even though I faced the brunt of not having had that support base in my home, I still had their support from a distance. So my mother, especially Patricia Harrison, would have been sending barrels of food and clothing and just support financially, for me. And what would have happened during those years when I was alone in Jamaica, having taken on the rearing of a younger relative too, wholly and solely, they would have been instrumental in employing domestic helpers to buffer the more challenging sides of living and existing in the home.
Right.
And so, I remembered even when I had switched to more expensive antipsychotic medication to keep me stable, my mother was instrumental in having given me that economic support base to be able to procure my medication in order to keep me stable. And then I would have frequently had phone calls from them and would have had talks with them, would have, bared my soul and talked about my stresses. And they all were very accommodative at the time.
Wonderful.
So I must say that even though I chose to remain in Jamaica and they would have made arrangements for me to go to the US, they still would have had, to some extent, to have respected my decision enough to have still, offered the support that they could have. Wow. And surely when my sister and my mother would have been able to have sorted out themselves there, mm-hmm. they would have made trips to Jamaica to visit. And that was always, those times were always good times for me.
Wonderful. So, we're saying that the support
very
during
important.
the spirit is very important. And, you're from St. Thomas and I'm from St. Thomas. And when we say the name Chevaughn C. Harrison in St. Thomas, I know the entire parish you know, they know who Sean is and they love the work that Sean continues to do. So
Thank
that,
you.
I must say,
Thank you.
is wonderful, right? And again, you know, you're speaking about challenges, right? And you mentioned some of the challenges that you would have had, but what keeps you grounded, or what helps you to cope on those harder days?
Well, you know, the truth is that, you know, the first thing is faith in God
Amen.
and the involvement of the divine, the involvement of the spiritual and supernatural aspects of our existence. Our Creator, Jehovah, Yahweh, Elohim, is the first place I will go to and you know, to let you know how I would have been able to manage even up until this time. You know, I remember going to a church outside of my regular Morant-based Seventh-day Adventist church that I used to attend.
Right.
And I would have been told by the apostle, when she discerned, your steps are ordered. And certainly, I have seen the hand of God at work in my circumstances in many, many instances and ways. And I'm just blown away every day to know that having started out with a faulty perception of God, you know, where I never even thought that He loved me, I would have come to the place today of knowing that God Himself, without a doubt, without reservation, has my interest at heart. He is watching over me. He is guiding my steps. He's directing me. So faith in God, first of all, is very important. And how do I survive otherwise? The wonderful persons who, outside of even my family, had offered support through the years, would have been a big part of why I have coped and survived to this day. You know, so when I mention people like, you know, Sister Isidonia Bennett, you know, Sister Yvonne Plowright, you know, Sister Dorrit Folks, Brother Delroy Folks, when I mention Mrs. Beryl Chevaughn Ford, when I mention even my best friend at the time, you know, Mr. Gregory Farrell, when I mention, you know, people like, you know, Miss Annette Edmond, who was in my home, well, in the time when I broke down, you know, having come from music school and I would have broken down, my cousin, Mr. Miguel, you know, Jermaine, Harrison, you know, and so many others in the community of the parish of St. Thomas, Jamaica. You know, those persons were definitely the wind beneath my wings. Even persons outside of the parish like Pastor David Grant, Pastor Dina Nicholas, you know, Pastor Glenville Carr, you know, in the parish again, I come back to the parish, you know, where the Reverend Remia Gordon, when she was alive, was a tower of strength and a bedrock under my feet. Miss Eva English, a mentor and good friend and sister in the faith, who in the sleepless nights, in the nights of torment and despair and depression, heard me out, were willing to give a listening ear, were willing to give advice, were willing to tell me what the scriptures said, were willing to pray with me. And even when I broke down at other times in latter years, especially between 2013 and 2018, you know, other persons like Miss Tamara Laws, Miss Jodianne, you know, Miss Jodianne, well, she's Williams now.
Okay.
Yes, you know, people like, you know, as I said, the Fords and so many others of the ordinary citizenry of the parish who would, when I started walking naked and I was wandering from place to place, would have alerted those whom they needed to alert, the mental health team, you know, friends and family members, say, go for Sean, he's there, I saw him walking to town, to Kingston naked, and people, you know, and I'm saying, if it weren't for the support that I would have had, especially in those times, I would not have been brought to this place of victory and triumph that I found myself today.
The support and the power of community,
Yes.
right? Indeed.
And also a strength within and a determination to fight the good fight of faith in spite of what challenges might have come my way and still do come my way. Those are things that would have undergirded my own survival to this day.
Right. So we're going to talk a little about the work you're doing, Sean. But before we do that, this is, I'm with the Lions Club, and we're doing this for the Lions Club. And the Lions Club motto is to serve. That's what we go out there and do. We volunteer and we do a lot of service activities. And Sean, when I look each time on your social media pages, I see you going out there and you are giving back.
Indeed.
You are going through this mental challenge. You have a mental illness, and you're not working like us, having a 9 to 5. Yet still, you find the time to go into the schools, to go into your just general community, and to give back. What encourages you? Why do you do that?
And again, going back to the fact, the two things that I said would have undergirded my survival, they are my primary motivations for giving back. It is how much I have been poured into, and it is how greatly involved Jehovah is in my life and circumstances. And also, from a very early age, my mother, Mrs. Patricia Patsy Harrison, taught me the importance of service to my fellow men. When I think of teachers like Miss Thompson or Mrs. Thompson White at the Mount Bay Primary, then all-age school that I attended, Mrs. Chung, when I thought of Mrs. Olga Higgins, when I thought of Mrs. Falloon, when I thought of all those persons, who themselves gave examples of sterling service throughout the years in St. Thomas, Jamaica, along with my mother, Mrs. Patricia Harrison, who always made sure that I was singing at the infirmaries at Christmas. I was singing at the hospital, the local hospital. I was singing at funerals, weddings, appreciation dinners, horticultural society events at the time. She always pushed me and prodded me, and the foundation she laid in also giving me duties at home to perform, many of which I rebelled against, but never disobeyed her, in doing. But, the fact that she, cemented those things in me also was very important, and is very important in why I serve. And also, the very fact that I am sensitive, to the needs of my fellow men, and very attuned to the fact that there are needs out there. There are suffering people out there. There are dying people out there. There are hungry people out there. And going straight to the mental illness that has affected me since 1997, that too would have birthed in me, having gone through the years, would have birthed in me a consciousness of the needs and the plights of others, the feelings of others, the experiences of others that might not be so pleasant. And so, because so much has been given to me and poured into me with everything that I said otherwise, I feel it fit, and I'm compelled to give back my life in sacrifice to the greater good and to my fellow men.
Oh, that is powerful, Sean. Very, very, very powerful.
Thank you.
Again, I see the work, and I always admire for that work. Again, to know that you have your own struggles, and
Yes.
despite all of that, you are giving back. So I appreciate that, and I really admire you for that.
Thank you, sir.
Now, at the top of this conversation, I spoke about the work, and we mentioned a lot about your writing and the songwriting, the poems, and all of that. So, I mean, everyone, all of St. Thomas, apart from you, having your mental illness, we know Sean as the creative one. So, talk about that. Give us some, the work. How has this encouraged you, and just tell my people a little bit more about the work that you are doing. And in the midst of it as well, if there's a platform, where they can see your work or support your work, let them know.
Yes, well, as it concerns, my creativity, I always go back to that song that I used to sing in Sabbath school. One talent have I to take to the sky, while others are blessed with 10 of the best. Why should I complain from due to refrain? No, never, not I. To know that I started out with one outstanding ability, which was the gift of song. Having been faithful in that through the instrumentality first of my mother, and then my father, and then my church community, as well as others around the St. Thomas community, Mark Bay, St. Thomas, Jamaica area, who would have loved to hear me sing and everything. Starting from that one talent, I realized that having been faithful in that one gift, not as the wicked servant who only had one talent and buried it, the Lord multiplied it, but not before I determined in myself that I was going to apply my talent and whatever it was else that I was going to be poised to do, I was going to apply myself to those things and do the necessary work, groundwork, that would have helped to make me a better singer, a better songwriter, a better poet, a better general writer. So I would have been through the long nights and the tiresome days, been writing, creating, scribing, often in the midnight hour, in the backside of the wilderness, so to speak, like Moses, where he had gotten his training from God, when my other talents never even saw the light of day. I was still practicing, I was still honing my talents, honing my skills, and also because of a sound educational background that I was given, first of all, through my family, my parents and my siblings by extension. I remembered when my sister Sandy would always win prizes of books at high school that she would take home, and I would read them. I would also hear her sing the folk songs, that she would have learned, as well as my mom, who later on joined a folk group with some other co-workers at the Mark Bay Primary School. And I would hear Miss Olive Lewin and the Jamaica folk singers, the records played in the home, and all of those things, would have helped to have birthed in me, the desire to continue creating. And so, as a result of the fact that I was exposed to so much, I didn't even realize in the outset that everything I read, everything I sang, everything I listened to, everything I imbibed was taking root in my heart and in my mind and in my brain, and would have helped to have informed a lot of what it was that I would have created through the years. So as I said, music was a mainstay. I started out as a singer, then a songwriter, then onwards I became a poet, and these are some of the books that I don't know if it's too early to introduce them.
No, you can
Yes, but these are some of the books. This is my first collection of poetry, A Deeper Joy. This is my sophomore collection of poetry, 3 Steps Away from Faith, which are 2 faith-based collections of poetry, inspirational and Christian poems as well. There is the 2nd edition and 1st edition of The Black in Me, which is a book of poetry about ethnicity and race, the struggle of the black race, and others, as I reminisce, that actually is poetry that speaks to life growing up in the parish of St. Thomas, Jamaica. And so, I would have ended up, compiling a total of 12 publications right? And it is not only poetry, there are works of prose, because this book, this big blue book, the Word of My Testimony, actually chronicles my actual testimonies of how God has used me, of how God has worked in my life, of how God has used others to bless me, and it's just an inspiring, account of, the workings of God in an otherwise broken life. So there would be other books, because there are 12 in total, and there would have been 2 anthologies in which my work would have been included, 1 poem each. As I show you this Miss Lou, 100 plus voices for Miss Lou, which was supposed to have, been published in the time of COVID to commemorate her 100th year of birth. This contains poetry and works from a number of luminaries, and one of my poems, My Dear Sister Sandy, was included in this anthology. So truth be told is that a lot of things would have conspired positively to have made me into who I am today. But if I did not put my shoulders to the wheel, if I did not take on the work, if I did not practice, if I did not decide to make mistakes, if I did not consult with others who were more experienced in the field, like Dr. Harold McDermott, as well as other persons, Professor Emeritus Mervyn Morris for a brief moment there, and, just have others to affirm my work and, and all of that. I don't think I would have been the person that I became and who I am today creatively. So even though my life in large part has been a broken one, because there are negatives that I remember that I know would have happened, but the greatest thing was that I decided to take my negative experiences and my not so pleasant experiences to pour them into my creativity. And very importantly, with the onset of this illness, which made me more introspective, inward looking, more observative, as well as aware of the needs and the struggles of others, the homeless, the mentally ill, the abused child, the battered wife, all of those things, the poor and needy, all of those things would have been importantly infused into who I am today and who I have been creatively.
Wonderful, wonderful. And you shared some of the work that you have done, but let us know if it is that we should support you, and I want us to support Sean.
Yes.
How do we go about getting your poems? How do we go about getting your work?
Okay, first of all, the internet, which is actually a staple for almost everybody now to go to for information, for answers, for entertainment. I must say, through the years, I have developed quite an internet presence.
Okay.
And so with 2 Facebook pages, one that is simply entitled Sean C. Harrison, another that is entitled Poetry of Sean C. Harrison, a TikTok page, as well as a YouTube channel, in addition, a Twitter account, and also, what should I say, websites like allpoetry.com, poemhunter.com, writerscafe.org, websites like The Gleaner, which had published some of my works years ago, The Gleaner Archives, websites, like Amazon, the Amazon platform on which all of my books, my 12 books to date, have been self-published through the Kindle Direct publishing vehicle. So I would have self-published these books, and as a result, of the availability of the internet to host my work, I would have been able to have amassed quite a treasure store of work right there. So as long as you go there and you look for Sean C. Harrison, SEANC. Harrison, then you would see so much on me. And in addition to that, the music that I do. Some of my music are on, the varying digital platforms, and some more are coming, as well as on ReverbNation.com. I have music there, and even on YouTube. I must say a vast store and cache of all kinds of entertaining videos where I recite patois poems, where I recite, excerpts from my books. I read excerpts from my books. There will be videos that actually speak about my experience of mental illness. Videos that talk about, other experiences that I would have had growing up, and music, and so much more. I also do welcome contributions and donations, because as you mentioned earlier, I'm not employed in a 9-to-5, and being immersed in community work and giving back to the parish of St. Thomas, and in whichever way I can, I depend heavily and largely on the kindness of friends, followers, well-wishers, and others who have been inspired by my work and who also have been inspired to be a part of what it is that I am doing. So all of that, actually speaks to how you can access my work. The internet, as long as you put my name in, Chevaughn C. Harrison, Jamaican poet, Jamaican singer, you'll also see newspaper articles. You'll also see on YouTube and otherwise interviews, TV, radio, internet interviews. I think I would have done a total of over 18 interviews so far. And they are all on the YouTube platform and scattered along the other social media platforms. Yes.
Right. So I have to tell my colleagues, please remember, it's not Chevaughn Harrison, Chevaughn C. Harrison. All right. It's his brand, and we look for him, we support him. He told you all the platforms that you're able to see his work. And I don't want you to go on a platform just to read it. I want you to go on Amazon and to purchase one of his books.
One or more.
One or more. Tell your colleagues, tell your friends to support him as well. Because again, you would have heard the work that he is doing, and we want him to continue it, because as Lions, that's what we do. And if we have someone who is supporting the work that we do, we support them in them supporting the work as well. So thank you very much again, Chevaughn. And just before we move on as well, I'm not sure if you're ready, but do you mind even sharing a line or a paragraph of one of your poems or so with us? Sure, you can, while you go ahead and look up the one that you want to share with us.
Yes.
We definitely want to say again, you are doing a great job. And I know once it is that my fellow Lions and my Leos, they go and they see the work that you are doing, they will be more than happy to connect with you. And if it is that you're not sure to connect with Chevaughn, you have me. You can definitely connect with me, and I will get in touch with him for you.
Okay.
So whenever you're ready.
I am ready. I wonder if I could share two.
Sure, go ahead.
Two? Well, as I opened this collection, the Black in Me second edition, the page opened to a poem entitled The Hungry Years, that is a semi-biographical sketch of a wonderful lady who lived in my community of Red Hills Pen, Red Hills Housing Scheme, St. Thomas, Jamaica, by the name of Miss Tiny Reed. I can't stop talking about that wonderful lady who gave and gave and gave. She was a dynamo for creating and, for cooking and, making traditional Jamaican snacks, selling to us children, selling at the all-age school, grater cake, coconut drops, tambourine ball, suck, popcorn, what is chew plum, toto, cupcakes, plain icing cake, sliced icing cake, and all of those things. She was a wonderful lady and a tireless giver who had such a compassionate heart that just embodied and still does embody the spirit of the Jamaican woman and the Jamaican people in general. And I would just like to pay homage to her, because this book not only contains books on poems on ethnicity and race and the black struggle and the issues surrounding, but this book also chronicles the lives through poetry of persons who I feel best embody the spirit of blackness and the spirit of the African value systems that would have been brought here and that would have been at play right there on the continent. And so The Hungry is inspired by Miss Tiny, Ma Tiny, or Mama Tiny, or Ma T. Reid. Reads thus: akin to the barrenness of the Sahara, she recounts her days of lack when early mornings saw her journeying in pale moonlight, a load of goods on head and back, the lingering memory of hungry mouths having no father branded vividly on her mind, her sole motivation through life's wilderness, proving mostly unkind. She shudders at flashbacks of risks, unexpected turns, when she rethinks those years of falls, tears, and burns, the betrayals of one too many friends who never saw fit to repay her kindness. But her compassion was timeless. No unrequited tenderness ever holding sway to send an outstretched hand away empty. But the bitter times have changed. Her children, her troop, fighting her wars for food and life's finer things. Now she has no story, no other story, but those lodged in memory, and a future never fathomed to be hers. For God has blessed. Now she rests, and only faint, brief outcries at worn joints, a back 1,000 too many times bent, and fingers once overworked punctuate her serenity. For fate and a noble destiny have set body, mind, and spirit free. Yes.
Wonderful.
That is
wonderful. Brings Tiny.
It's Tiny, Mama Tiny.
Wonderful.
Yes, indeed.
All right. So let's go ahead to the other.
I'd love to share another poem from the legend of a woman. This poem was written in tribute to women and womanhood, because to tell you the truth, for me personally, one of the things that kept me was the female influence over my life growing up. And because of that, I've come to have a deep reverence for women and womanhood, especially the elderly and those who have walked the road, and the struggling mother and the little girl who is trying to find herself. So it's so fitting that I should read from this book that I put together with poetry that celebrates women and womanhood.
Right.
And so let me just choose a poem that actually hits home and is close to my heart, that speaks of my mother, Mrs. Patricia Harrison, now deceased. And this poem is a longing and a yearning after her decease to have her back again. And though I know that is not possible until we cross over, Return, My Mother is one of the poems I wrote to commemorate her life and to show my own longing, for her presence and for her, input in my own life. But I have now healed from her death, I must say, and I just live in the memory of the vast storehouse of experiences we had and things she did. She had a wonderful voice to sing, and she was, in many respects, a beautiful person. Return, my mother. Return to that haven of buckskin hued walls and wooden window panes. That's my home now. That sacred space of the glistening stainless steel stove, icebox, and warmers, where racks and shelves were welcoming hosts of brightly colored plaques, collectors' mugs, and that painting of fruits held captive in a lightly stained frame. Of Christmas Eve clutter, baking tins and ingredients, return, my mother. Let me hear that voice like chimes singing Sunday songs, that clarion voice calling kitchen hands, where life's staff swelled at your doing and hunger fled far, where we learned each other more as your flawless face peered into me. For I am not the same, for your segue into eternity. Yes.
Wonderful work, dear Sean. Wonderful work. And you know, again, I really admire the work. You know, I'm not as talented as you are, but I know that we have people like you out there that will continue to work, to do the work and share the work, and for not just us Jamaicans, but for the world to know that, again, despite having any mental challenge, any mental illness,
Yes.
it doesn't stop, right? It doesn't define who you are. And as we come to the end, right, I want you to just look in that camera and to just give, to tell them, just something to, because we all understand, we know that schizophrenia is something that's misunderstood, right? So I want you to tell my lions and my colleagues who are watching, you know, one thing that you would want to tell them about, you know, schizophrenia, something just to encourage them, and even for those persons who may themselves be struggling from the illness, some form of encouragement that you would want to provide to them.
First of all, what I can think of readily and most readily is the very fact of, just as you said, how misunderstood mentally ill people are and mental illness is and mental illnesses are in especially our Jamaican paradigm. Stand as a prime example of the fact that one can rise above the challenge of mental illness, to do great things, to be something beautiful, and to richly, you know, and to richly bless his or her world, so that persons, you know, out there can see that it is not a death sentence.
Right.
For many persons, because the examples that we are wont to see are usually the more extreme ones, where the persons are dirty on the streets, disoriented, aggressive, you know, incoherent. We often think that that is the be-all and end-all of mental illness. But knowing for how many years I remained stable, worked a full-time job for 10 years, and given the fact that when certain telling stresses fell upon me in later years, and I became just like one of those men or women that you would see on the streets. I walked naked, I walked dirty, I was verbally aggressive, I was incoherent, I was psychotic, you know, and then to have had that miraculous turnaround that would see me sitting here this morning telling you that it is not over. Whomever you are out there, whether you're suffering from depression or paranoid schizophrenia or bipolar disorder or asthenia or, you know, obsessive compulsive disorder, you know, whatever it is, anxiety, PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, whatever it is, take me as an example of a life that was meant to influence positively all around, even through the dark times. And I am glad that the Lord has set me as an example to others, because when we think of even other productive members of the Jamaican as well as, you know, society as well as other countries who have distinguished themselves in spite of mental illness, it is truly not often that you can have someone, you know, who can deeply and in a detailed way articulate the nuances and the ins and outs and the ups and downs of mental illness, all of which I have done in videos and in writing on social media and in making presentations. And I am sure that a number of persons, as they have expressed on social media and otherwise, have gained quite a different and a deeper understanding of the whole phenomenon that is mental illness. And so I want you all to know that it is not the end for you. When you had to drop out of college, when you had to give away your child because of postpartum psychosis or depression, when you had to give up your job because of mental illness, when you had to, be abandoned by even your family, these are things which I would have experienced myself. But thank God, there was a turnaround for me, and there can be a turnaround and will be a turnaround for you if you have faith in God, if you determine that you will not be defined by this illness, if you determine that you will not allow this illness to cripple you, even though it can be very crippling, then, saying this, I am glad that I stand as an example of triumph over suffering and triumph over defeat. And so I just want everyone to know that that family member that was once so bright and has been pushed to the back burner, you need to take him off the back burner, off the shelf, dust him off, love him or her back to sanity, and support him or her, give him or her the support that I had gotten through my family and the community, church community, as well as the social structure, and even for the few persons who were supportive when I was working, and even in as I said, the church, get that person back on their feet and let them know that you can still do and you can still be all that you want to be. And even if you fall short of the mark, you still can live a productive, a meaningful, and a blessed life in spite of mental illness. I am still on medications. I still have my moments, but thank God, His grace has brought me a mighty long way, and I know He can do it for you too. The title of a song that I'm working on now, that I wrote, He can do it for you too. Those are my words.
Sean, thank you so very much for sharing your story, your heart with us, right? I mean, your journey reminds us that even through struggle, there can be purpose. And that creativity has the power to heal, to connect, and inspire. And we truly appreciate your courage, your honesty, and the light you bring to this conversation. And to everyone that's here with us, remember that mental health, it matters. Let's continue breaking the silence, supporting one another, and building communities here, communities that understand. And if Sean's story moved you, if what he shared with us today moved you, let us take a moment to explore his work, share his message, and support his creative journey. Again, thank you so very much, Sean.
Yes.
Because again, it's voices like yours that help us to move closer to a world where empathy and awareness leads the way. Thanks.
You're very welcome. It was my pleasure. God bless.